Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I was seated at the far end of the room at what I could only call the overflow table, a wobbly fold-out tucked near the serving station. From here, I could see everything. My mother at the center of it all, radiant in a navy silk dress, soaking in the applause. Tonight was supposed to be about her retirement, her decades of work as a powerhouse in education reform. And yet, it felt like a stage for everyone else, too. "Let's raise our glasses to Marcus," one of my mother's colleagues announced, his voice booming over the microphone. "A true genius in pediatric neurosurgery. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, huh?" The crowd laughed, clinked glasses, and someone patted Marcus on the back. My brother, in his perfectly tailored suit, gave a humble little shrug, as if the praise embarrassed him, though I knew he lived for it. Next came Isabel, my sister. "And to Isabel," the man continued, "who's out there representing our country as a diplomat. We're proud to say she belongs to this family." Isabel smiled gracefully, accepting the praise like it was just another cocktail on a tray being handed to her. No one raised a glass for me. I shifted in my seat, pretending to be busy with the bread basket while snippets of conversation from my table floated around. "You're still doing those freelance tech things, right?" my aunt asked, tilting her head as though she was trying to remember what I did for a living. "You make websites?" I smiled, polite and tight-lipped. "Something like that?" "Oh, the wellness ones," chimed in my cousin Sarah, who had been drinking white wine all night. "Are you still making those? You know, with the cute pastel colors and all?" The table chuckled and my face warmed. I nodded like it didn't matter, like this wasn't the 10th time someone had reduced years of work to a quirky side hobby. I stayed quiet as the teasing grew sharper, louder. "So," Sarah's boyfriend said, grinning like he was setting up a punchline, "how's the business model for wellness websites these days? Are people actually paying for that?" It was like a trigger. The table erupted in laughter, and I felt every eye, amused, dismissive, turned toward me. Someone muttered something about me being the artsy one, while another added, "Well, at least she's independent." The tone wasn't praise. It was a subtle pat on the head, the kind you'd give a child for trying. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell them that just this afternoon, I had signed a deal that would change my life forever. That Lucent, my digital cognitive therapy platform, had just been acquired by Horizon Syndicate for $2.6 billion. But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and let the laughter wash over me like I wasn't even there. They wouldn't understand anyway, not tonight. I looked toward my mother, who was laughing at something Marcus said. For years, I told myself her approval didn't matter. But sitting there, invisible and mocked, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. I was 10 years old the first time I realized my ideas were treated more like party tricks than anything worth taking seriously. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind my mother insisted on hosting every month. Linen tablecloth, polished silverware, the works. I came down from my room carrying something I had been working on for weeks, a small hand-built robot dog made of salvaged wires, tin, and sensors I'd begged for on my birthday. It could follow a voice command, wag its tail, and even bark in a pitchy, metallic tone. "Look," I said, setting it on the floor by my father's chair. "I built it to help kids with sensory challenges. It can calm them down when they're anxious." My voice was bright, hopeful. My father gave it a quick glance, chuckled, and patted me on the head like I was a toddler showing off a crayon drawing. "That's cute, sweetheart," he said before turning back to Marcus. "So, tell me about that new research you're doing at the hospital. Something with neonatal imaging?" Marcus, all of 15 and already being called a prodigy, launched into a detailed explanation. The conversation moved on without a pause, and my robot kept wagging its little tin tail as though it hadn't just been dismissed. I stood there smiling until I couldn't anymore. Moments like that weren't rare. They became a pattern. By high school, I had learned to expect it. When I stayed up late coding a choose-your-own-path mental health simulator for my computer science project, an idea I thought was groundbreaking, I brought it to the family table, hoping for a reaction beyond the polite clapping I'd seen as a kid. "Is it like a video game?" Marcus asked, his tone amused. "Sort of," I said, trying to explain how it helped users practice coping strategies. Isabel, 17 then, and already fluent in French, raised an eyebrow. "That's adorable, Alara. Very creative." She said it like she was talking about a finger painting. I laughed it off because what else could I do? Somewhere along the way, I started accepting the role they'd carved out for me. The oddball, the cute one who dabbled in eccentric projects. It was safer to shrug and let their voices drown mine out. But in the quiet moments, I wondered what it would have felt like if just once someone looked at me the way they looked at Marcus or Isabel, like I was someone worth betting on. I slipped away from the banquet room as soon as the speeches shifted toward another long anecdote about Marcus saving a child's life on the operating table. The laughter and clinking glasses faded behind me as I stepped into a quiet hallway lined with framed photos of my mother's career milestones. I leaned against the wall, the hum of the event muffled now, and pulled out my phone. The notification was waiting. A single, simple ping from my attorney. I tapped it open and stared at the words. The acquisition is finalized. Funds cleared. Congratulations, Ilara. For a moment, I just stood there, the air sharp in my lungs. $2.6 billion. That was the number that now defined the platform I built in the dark, alone, with no one watching and no one believing. Lucent was no longer just mine, but its impact, and my place in history, was undeniable. I thought back to the garage. It had been cold that winter, the kind of cold that makes your fingers ache as you type. I was broke, newly single, and living off cheap takeout while teaching myself how to turn grief into code. The breakup with my co-founder, Dan, had been public and humiliating. He'd called me emotional dead weight during our last meeting, accusing me of being too naive to run anything real. He left with the investors we'd pitched to, and I was left with nothing but a prototype and the stubborn belief that someone needed what I was building. Lucent wasn't born out of ambition for money or recognition. It was built for people like me, people who had sat in therapists' offices and felt unseen, people who needed tools that understood the mess of mental health without judgment. I coded every module from scratch, balancing algorithms and late-night tears, never sure if anyone would care. When I finally launched the beta, it was just me answering support emails and pushing updates at 2 a.m. Now, Horizon Syndicate, one of the biggest players in health tech, owned it, and they wanted me to lead its next chapter. Founder, architect, visionary. All titles that still felt foreign to me. I scrolled through my messages. My family's group chat was still buzzing about Marcus's toast and Isabel's latest assignment abroad. No one here knew, not my mother, not my siblings, not the cousins who joked about my little projects. I had the power to interrupt all their conversations with one sentence, but I didn't. They didn't need to know yet. I tucked my phone back into my clutch and took a deep breath. The noise from the gala drifted back as I walked toward the doors. They would find out soon enough. And when they did, I wanted the truth to hit them like a quiet storm. Sudden, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. By the time I returned to the main hall, the party had shifted into small clusters of conversations. I slipped back to my table just in time to catch my cousin Adam whispering to his date. She runs some kind of app thing, he said, his voice pitched low but not low enough. It's like a mood tracker or meditation. I don't know. She dropped out of school for it. His date laughed softly. Oh, like one of those hobby startups? Cute. I didn't flinch. I just poured myself some water and listened. I was used to being cute. From the table next to us, my mother chimed in as though she'd overheard the whole thing. We're proud of Ilara, she said, smiling in my direction. She's very independent. She's always had her own way of doing things. Her tone made it sound like independent meant directionless. I forced a small smile. Thanks, Mom. Mom went on, turning back to her friend. Of course, it's not exactly a success story like Marcus or Isabel, but it's hers, and we love her for it. The comment stung, but I stayed quiet. I'd grown up on that tone, the one that praises you just enough to make the dismissal polite. Moments later, Isabel approached with a glass of champagne. She leaned down, her perfect diplomatic smile plastered on her face. Ilara, she said warmly, I was just telling someone about your work. It's so non-linear, very creative, you know? Inspiring in a way that doesn't rely on traditional success. Non-linear, I repeated, tasting the word like something sour. Yes, Isabel said, tilting her head. It's wonderful that you've carved out your own little niche, even if it's not. She stopped herself, letting the implication hang. I set my glass down. I didn't carve out a niche, I said quietly but firmly. I didn't take a path. I built one. The table went silent. Isabel's smile froze, and Adam looked like he'd swallowed his drink wrong. For once, I didn't care. Something clicked inside me in that moment, a clean and final break. They didn't see me, not really. They never had. I wasn't going to keep asking them to. I leaned back in my chair, watching the room. The polite laughter, the scripted compliments, the unspoken ranking of who mattered most. I felt oddly calm. Let them keep their toasts and their titles. They would know soon enough who I really was. The lights dimmed as someone tapped a glass near the front of the room. "One last toast," my mother's colleague announced, lifting his wine. "To celebrate her extraordinary career and the bright future ahead for all of us she's inspired." The room quieted, except for the faint shuffle of servers clearing plates. I felt like a spectator to my own family, a stranger tucked into the background while Marcus and Isabel sat up front, their names echoing in every story and every laugh. Then, through the window behind the podium, I saw a headlight sweep across the driveway. A sleek black limo rolled up, its polished surface reflecting the string lights overhead. I barely registered the movement until the double doors opened and someone stepped inside. The conversation cut off like someone had hit mute. Adrienne Vale, Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Syndicate. She didn't walk so much as glide, dressed in a sharp, understated suit that radiated command. Her presence was quiet but impossible to ignore. Every pair of eyes followed her as she moved through the crowd, past the tables, past the podium, straight toward me. "Elara," she said, her voice even and calm, "your flight is ready. We're wheels up in 35. Somewhere in the silence, a glass dropped and shattered. No one moved. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. My mother's smile faltered for the first time that night. Marcus tilted his head, confused. Isabel's expression froze, like she was trying to compute what was happening but couldn't. "Thank you, Adrienne," I said, my voice steady. I slipped my clutch under my arm and stepped away from the table. "Elara, wait," Isabel said, half rising from her chair. I didn't look back. Adrienne held the door for me as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Behind me, I heard a low murmur ripple through the room. Whispers, half-formed questions, the sharp crack of disbelief. As we stepped into the warm night air, the limo driver opened the door. Adrienne gave me a small nod of approval as I slid into the plush leather seat. She followed, closing the door with a soft click that felt louder than anything inside that gala. For a moment, we sat in silence. The tinted windows framed the scene I'd just left, a room full of people frozen mid-thought, realizing that the quirky tech hobbyist they'd dismissed all evening was someone worth more than any of their combined accolades. Adrienne glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "That was flawless," she said. "You didn't need to say a word. They'll figure it out." I let out a slow breath and leaned back in the seat, the tension in my chest uncoiling. "Good," I said quietly. "It's about time." The limo pulled away from the venue, leaving the string lights and polite chatter behind. I didn't look back once. 3 days after the gala, my phone buzzed with a notification from a podcast I didn't even subscribe to. A friend had sent me the clip with a single message. "You need to hear this." I pressed play. Marcus's voice filled my kitchen. You know, when my sister was working on that wellness app, Lucent, I think it's called, I gave her a lot of advice. She was pretty lost at the time, and I tried to guide her towards something more practical. I stopped the recording. Guide me? He hadn't even answered my text for months when I was coding in that freezing garage. The next notification hit harder. Isabel's smiling face appeared in a professional newsletter. "Elara has always been a dreamer." The quote read, "I encouraged her to take big swings, even if they didn't make sense at first." I closed my laptop, my pulse climbing. None of it was true, not the mentorship, not the encouragement. If anything, their voices had been the ones telling me to get a real job while I was debugging code at 3 a.m. I walked to my office and pulled open the drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a folder, the paper kind, battered and overstuffed. Old investor emails, early prototypes, time-stamped commits, and lines of code I'd written when everyone thought I was wasting my time. I spent the afternoon scanning, uploading, organizing every piece of proof that Lucent was mine, that it had always been mine. I didn't add commentary or throw blame. I didn't have to. By evening, I had drafted a simple blog post. No one believed me. I built it anyway. I hit publish and waited. It didn't take long. By nightfall, the post had gone viral, not because of the acquisition or the billions attached to my name, but because the story resonated. Comments poured in from women who had been laughed at, ignored, or erased, a pattern I hadn't realized I was part of until that moment. My team said I was too emotional to lead a project. We hit $10 million last quarter. They told me to stick to marketing. Now I run my own dev studio. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. I sat back and read every comment, letting the solidarity sink in. It wasn't anger I felt, but a kind of quiet power, the kind I hadn't known I'd been holding all along. My family's version of the story was already unraveling, and this time I wasn't going to correct them with polite smiles. I had proof, I had my voice, and for once, I wasn't afraid to use either. The old library smelled faintly of sawdust and paint, the kind of scent that clung to places being remade into something better. What used to be tall shelves and reading lamps had been transformed into open workstations with scattered laptops, wires, and small 3D printers humming in the background. I slipped in quietly, unnoticed at first. This place wasn't branded with my name. I didn't want it to be. The incubator existed because I had funded it under a Shell Foundation. No press releases, no glossy plaques. Just a space where girls who love to tinker, code, and build could do so without anyone laughing at them. Near the back, a girl in a faded NASA hoodie sat hunched over a laptop. She couldn't have been older than 13, her dark curls tied back with a pencil. I watched as she typed furiously, pausing only to test something on her phone. She noticed me after a minute, blinking with curiosity. "Are you the jet lady?" she asked. I hesitated. "The jet lady?" She grinned. "One of the mentors told us someone came here once in a private jet, just to check the building plans. That was you, right?" I laughed softly. "I guess that was me." Her face lit up. "Cool. Want to see what I'm building?" She didn't wait for me to answer. She turned her screen toward me, showing a simple, clean interface. It's a check-in app for kids who don't like talking to teachers about feeling sad. It pings a buddy on the network to chat with them instead. I'm still testing the alerts. She spoke with the same bright certainty I once had. Before I learned what it felt like to be ignored, to be told your work was adorable, but not serious. I leaned closer, genuinely impressed. "This is really smart. You should keep going with it." "Thanks," she said, her eyes bright. "Nobody here tells me to stop. That's why I love it." I stayed a few minutes longer, listening as she explained how she wanted the app to expand into schools. I didn't mention Lucent or the headlines from last week. None of that mattered here. As I walked out, the late afternoon light spilled across the polished floors, and I caught a glimpse of a dozen other girls just like her, heads bent over keyboards, whiteboards covered in chaotic scribbles, small sparks of ideas waiting to grow. Outside, I paused, looking back at the quiet building. No one was taking my picture, no one was applauding, but I smiled anyway. Recognition was never the point. Watching them dream out loud, without asking permission, that was enough.